yourself a cold one.
They strike 'em, huh?
And listen to Ross Tucker break down the top college prospects on another tasty edition of The College Draft.
Yeah, it's Daddy Soda time here on the College Draft Podcast, presented, as always, by DraftKings. I kind of like that, right? The College Draft, DraftKings, presented by those guys. Use the code Ross, whether you're playing best ball like we are, or whether you're placing a wager maybe on the preseason games, which start up this week. Speaking of the preseason games, I'm not aware of a better guide than the draft guide from my guy, Emory Hunt. Footballgameplan.com/2024 draft guide. Yeah, you can Google the guy and find out more information or whatever. He's on your team's roster now. It's not a scouting report. It's not a scouting report of his strengths and weaknesses based on how he performed in college, like Emory has already done. What a fun day, by the way, because we're wrapping up our preview series conference by conference. So if you missed it, we did the Big 12, the Big 10, the ACC, and last week the SEC. Now we're doing the other categories. That's G5, FCS, D2, D3. Nobody has a better handle on that stuff than Emory. Check him out on social media. He's at FBallGamePlan on Twitter. Kind of made his name for himself at the start on YouTube with that awesome football game plan page on YouTube. I think most of you know I'm Ross Tucker, former NFL offensive lineman. At Ross Tucker NFL is where you can get me on social. At Ross Tucker Pod is where you get us. By the way, great episode today with Warren Sharp. Always interesting to hear the information that he gleans, the data that he has for different teams, league-wide, etc. Highly encourage you, if you didn't already or don't already, to check out the Ross Tucker Football Podcast. Might have a special guest on this show next week to take one more look at the prospects for this college football season in general. Before the week after that, believe it or not, we got some week 0 games where Emory will talk about the top prospects in the biggest games. Not that many week 0 games, but there's some. And Emory will be able to talk about those guys in a couple weeks from now. All right, Emory, it's a wide swath, right? I mean, from G5 all the way down to D3. I see you even have a couple of Canadian guys in here. I guess they're Canadian college guys. Unbelievable. I think it sounds like the top non-P4 prospect right now, or what I've been reading or whatever, might be a guy you've talked about a couple times on the show, Ashton Jeanty, the running back from Boise State. What's interesting about him is, as you said, didn't hear a lot of people talking about him during the season or even January, February, March. And in fairness, that's when the draft people are working on the 2024 draft. But as soon as they turned the page and started prepping for the 2025 draft, started to hear a lot about Ashton Jeanty, the running back from Boise State. Emory, what do you see when you check him out?
You know, there is a lot to like about Jeanty. He's, built like, let's say, an Emmitt Smith. He's about 5'8.5", 215 pounds, very low to the ground, natural body control and balance. He runs through contact rather well. I think he has a smooth acceleration. So once he sees a hole, he can really just hit the gas and go. So he can rip off long runs. He's an excellent receiver, and not just your standard swings, screens, flares, and flats, but someone that can catch the football down the field. And he's not the most elusive in space, so he's going to have to be better at making guys miss because he tends to want to lower that shoulder and run through tacklers. But he is a very good, well-rounded back, and I'm expecting big things from him this year from Boise State.
You know, Well, yeah, Boise State. They got the transfer quarterback from USC, Malachi Nelson. They've got that edge rusher who's really good, preseason defensive player of the year. Actually, great story. I talked with him, Emory, at the Mountain West Media Days for a while. Grew up in Egypt. Like it's an amazing story. He's really trying to make the NFL to be able to bring the rest of his family from Egypt to the United States. It's a wild, wild story. He's a heck of a player in his own right. A couple thoughts on Jeanty. I always wonder when it's a guy this talented, how he ended up at Boise. And they were telling me his head coach, Spencer Danielson, he didn't really play very much until his senior year. Even his junior year in high school, there was a running back ahead of him. So he primarily played receiver because they had like a Division I running back ahead of him. So he primarily played receiver. So he had some like lower offers, and he went to camp at Boise, which is why they offered him. And then what happened is he had a ridiculous senior year because he's a really good player. Then the other bigger schools started to come in. He's like, nope, I'm going to Boise. They offered me before any of you other guys did, so I'm going there. So, you always wonder how those stories happen.
Yeah, and you look at now that you mentioned the background of him playing receiver. That's what shows up on film. Just a comfortable guy out in space, can run routes, can be a downfield threat in the passing game.
It's interesting too because when you watch him, he's not like super fast. He's not like super elusive, like you said, but people have a tough time getting him down on the ground. He just he finds a way. By the way, it's Ahmed Hassanin is the preseason All-American from Boise State, the defensive end who had a really big year last year. Let's get to some of the other guys. There's some other running backs, Emory, that you liked quite a bit that we were talking about before the show, including Lan Larison from UC Davis.
Watching him, and we just talked about Jeanty and his receiving skills. Larison is someone that if you just lined him up in a slot and had him just run routes, he's very good at that as well. So he's another one of these guys that are very good out in space, can catch the football rather well. But his running skills and his patience and his ability to see the cutback is really impressive. And watching how productive he was against Oregon State, then watch him rip up like an Idaho State or someone like that, shows you he has those plus level skills. And UC Davis is another one that is one of these premier programs in the Big Sky. Larison is someone, once people start to get around to the FCS prospects, they'll be impressed with what he brings to the table.
So just curious, Emory, how do you hear about all these guys? Like, we're going to get to a D2 guy. We're going to get to an HBCU guy. We got a couple of Canadian guys. I mean, I know you put a lot of time in and stuff, but in all sincerity, what are your best sources of information to know about all these guys at the lower levels? It's really easy to find information on the P4 guys and the FBS guys, but I'm amazed. I would say I've only heard of, other than Jeanty, I've only even heard of one of the other guys we're talking about, and that's Isaiah Reed from Brown, because he goes to Brown. He's in the Ivy League, so that's why I've heard of him. I followed the Ivy League a little bit. So I guess I'm just curious about how you originally get these names, because somebody has to, at some point, tip you off or say, hey, you got to check this guy out or something.
A lot of people underestimate my exposure and what I am in terms of a football analyst. You talked about the Ivy League. I do weekly previews for the Ivy League. You talk about HBCUs. I broadcast a lot of HBCU games. I'm a color analyst there. You talk about some of these Canadian guys. I'm up in Canada, every spring at the All-Star game, at their All-Star game, and other guys, because as you know, Ross, I'm a FCS top 25 voter. So doing my job properly, I'm watching a lot of FCS ball games, so I'm keeping track of these teams throughout the year. And when guys stand out, you kind of earmark and keep copious notes like, hey, this guy stood out. Let me earmark him. Oh, he's a junior kid. Let me remember him. I want to put him in my draft guide. So people underestimate the amount of football I'm around. And if you are around it, you know how to, pick up what you're seeing out there on the field or on film, and you earmark who's standing out. You just kind of have a running list. And because I'm exposed so much to different things, you kind of are able to pull from many different places.
You derive more joy from finding smaller school guys or identifying legit smaller school prospects than you do from evaluating, the big names, don't you?
Yeah, because it's easier to look at the Alabama player and say, wow, he's a really good player. Like, no, you know what? He's from Alabama, right? He plays at Alabama, of course. So to me, and I've always felt this way, where the true scouting talent is to be able to watch a Division III game and say, that dude has Sunday level talent, or that dude can play in a pro game. Or even when you watch, someone at a Power 5 or a G5 program, it's like, you know what, man? This dude could actually thrive in the CFL more so than the NFL. So that's what I take pride in, because it shows your true scouting chops into, one, being to identify the talent, and two, being able to rank and file the talent as well.
Love it. I absolutely love it. Almost as much as I love Labatt Blue Light, which is totally delicious. Man, I had Labatt Blue Light Lime a bunch this weekend. I had a lot of regular LBLs. It's my favorite light beer. It's why they're my sponsor. I drank it. I drank it with my wife. I drank it with my friends on the beach, living life to the power of we. Always enjoy responsibly beer. Labatt USA, Buffalo, New York. Okay, let's get to a guard. It feels like this school pumps out a bunch of O-linemen, and it feels like if there's ever a prospect from this school, they're going to get mentioned on the show. It seems like they get mentioned on the show. Let's talk about AJ Gillie, the guard from Louisiana.
Listen, Ross, you talked. We could do a whole 3-episode arc on prospects coming from Louisiana. But you're right. That offensive line development that's going down there in Acadiana Parish is tremendous. Like, Gillie is a dominant guard. Like, I'm talking about clears out space in the run game. And he follows along the lines of other great Raging Cajun interior offensive linemen and tackles that end up playing on the inside. So, yes, they know how to recruit them down there. We know how to develop them. And we know how to make sure they have a great pathway to the pros. So while I'm on this national outlet, Ross, I have to let people know, high school players, if you want to go to the NFL and you're an offensive lineman and you don't want everybody all up in the videos, come to UL, get developed, go pro. Gillie is a dominant player. I thought he would have come out last year, but he's going to be eligible to play in these all-star games this season, and he is another one of these early day 2 type linemen coming from the Raging Cajun program.
What about, speaking of guards, how about Clay Webb from Jacksonville State?
Listen, I had a front row seat as the sideline analyst. Again, we talk about exposure. I was on the broadcast for the Florida International Jacksonville State game down in Miami. So I was field level watching the work they were doing on the interior, running the football. He's another one. He's good on the move. So you love the athleticism there. Opens up your playbook, tremendously in terms of what you're able to do running the football and protecting the quarterback when you put him out on the move. And when you talk about climbing to the second level and finding work and not just climbing for the sake of climbing, he is actively, purposefully finding a guy and putting him out the way. So, yes, this is a tremendous prospect coming from Jacksonville State. I know a lot of folks are very high on him as well.
Keeping it moving, I mentioned his name earlier. An Ivy League corner? I mean, Emory, Ivy League has players that go on to transfer to Power 5 or Power 4 and play well. Ivy League has a couple NFL prospects every year. I can't remember the last corner. It's usually like O-line maybe a receiver. There's been some good receivers, some quarterback. Corner, I almost never. Tell me about Isaiah Reed from Brown.
Isaiah Swan was the last corner coming out of Dartmouth
Yeah.
that we saw at the East-West Shrine Bowl. So, but yeah, you're right. It's rare. So, when you look at Brown's corner, I mean, you talk about someone that has good click and close ability. He's long, and so he's athletic. So I like how he can stay patient in that regard before he drives on the ball, use that length of that far hand to get the ball out the way. He's someone that checks the box athletically. And I like that he goes to Brown because I know in practice, with the way Brown throws the football, their quarterback is really good too. With the way Brown throws the football, he's getting a lot of work and a lot of experience in the passing game. And so, quiet as kept, the Ivy League does a great job of developing both receivers, which means your corners are going to be solid, and O-line, D-line tends to be solid as well. Shout out to Mason Tipton that's down there in New Orleans right now out of Yale, balling in training camp.
It sounds like Tipton's doing well down there. Didn't they have him talk to the media or something?
Yeah. So again, and he was another one that stood out throughout the All-Star game circuit. You like, man, this like you hope he got the opportunity because he's not 6'5" or 6'2", but for a shorter guy that's quick and explosive and bursty, he's creating separation consistently, and that showed up on film at Yale.
Let's get to an athlete now, Emory. DeJuan Mathis from Davenport. First of all, you got to tell me about Davenport, and then tell me about DeJuan Mathis.
Sparky McEwen is a fantastic coach at Davenport. He is a tremendous coach. Turned that program around, had those guys playing really good ball in the GLIAC. And Mathis, if you remember the name, he was the quarterback that gave way to Stetson Bennett. Remember that game against Arkansas? That's DeJuan Mathis. And the reason why I have him listed as an athlete.
Oh, that's why you still have – okay.
Because he transferred to Temple, played a little quarterback receiver, but at Davenport, he primarily is going to focus at receiver. And he has the height, he has the athleticism, he can play receiver, so it's going to be fascinating to watch his development here because Davenport is a fantastic Division II program. Coach McEwen knows how to identify and develop talent, that's been the running theme here. And so we've seen them cultivate Mathis, and this is I feel like he's been in college for as long as Stetson Bennett has been in college. So this is his last go around. I think he has another year after this if he wants it. So how quickly he can get up to speed at receiver with all the testing that he can do in terms of the speed and the 40 and the vertical jump. Keep an eye on Mathis.
What about a running back from Central Arkansas? This guy sounds like a running back. Shunderrick Powell.
Listen, and he's not like the jitterbug in terms of the side-to-side agility that Tariq Cohen has or had, but when you talk about straight 0 to 60 acceleration, he has that. And you go and watch him like stop, start, and then accelerate against Oklahoma State. He tore up North Dakota State. I think he had like 2-something against North Dakota State, which is unheard of. And he has that acceleration that translates to the pro game. Like he can rip off 70-yard runs. He's about 5'6.5", so he's short. But again, you can't see what you can't catch. You can't hurt what you can't touch. You know what I'm saying? Or you know how the saying goes. And that's what I see with Powell.
It's interesting. I was looking at like the NFL running back prospects. It's amazing how many of them are between 5'7" and 5'9". If you're a shorter player, the best position for you by far is running back. By far. Because it doesn't really – how does height really help you as a running back? The shorter you are, the lower you are to the ground, you're probably going to have better contact balance and probably be shiftier. There's a kid at my high school, Emory, who's going to be a sophomore. He's a really, really good player. He's not very tall, but I sent it to him. I was like, listen – just keep getting stronger and balling out as a running back because he's like 5'8". I'm like, you're perfect height for a running back. He's taller than guys like MJD and some of those guys.
And that's the thing, especially when we're reference to Powell, watching his tape and when you see the end zone view and they're running like power and you like, yo, how the hell are you supposed to play linebacker and find this dude? Because he's hiding behind these 2 pulling linemen. And by the time you realize where he is, he cuts on a dime and he's out the gate. Like, that's the advantage you have being a shorter player.
Let's get to Lenoir-Rhyne. They still playing D2 in North Carolina, right?
Yes.
All right. And they've got a D tackle named Andre Jefferson.
He is strong as all outdoors. And if you plopped him with Kentucky or Clemson, he'd fit right in. So that's why he has such a high, projection from a lot of people, a lot of scouts. When you're watching Lenoir-Rhyne, they're always a very good football team, and you see him win at the point of attack, disengage, and then be able to chase the ball going either direction. He is someone I can't wait to see get down in the All-Star game circuit. His play strength reminds me so much of what I saw from David Onyemata out of Manitoba when he was down at the East-West Shrine Bowl, and I was like, he looked like Leroy Glover in terms of his arms and how he was just throwing Power 5 offensive linemen out the way. And then we've seen that translate to the NFL. I can see things coming from Jefferson here as well because that's how strong he plays.
Got it. All right. Let's stay on the D-line with Elijah Williams at Morgan State down in Baltimore.
Called a lot of those games, man. Williams is someone that is a game wrecker. He's about 6'4", 275, something like that, maybe 6'3", 275, but can play across the front for Morgan State. And you watch him win with power, win with twitch, has a great sense of timing. When he missed the game or was out of the game against Norfolk State, all you saw Norfolk State do was run to that side where he was. He gets back in the game. They stop running that side. He blows up plays. Like, he is someone that is tremendous. Keep an eye also for Larry Asante, another defensive end at Morgan State, 6'7", legit 6'6" at least, about 245, long, athletic, kind of built like Cam Brown that played at Penn State.
Yeah.
Asante is another one that's a really good one.
Okay, how about a quarterback, Zach Zebrowski from Central Washington?
Oh, it's from Central Missouri. That's my mistake. The
Oh,
Mules.
sorry, Central Missouri. Sorry.
So the Mules out of the MIAA, great football conference. You talking about Northwest Missouri State, all those programs, right? And so he can really sling the football. I like how he throws with both touch, timing, and anticipation. Yes, he can work touchdown to check down, but the ball comes out where it needs to be. It comes out perfectly. And he is someone that, rises to the level of the occasion too. Was one of the more, I think he won the Harlan Hill Trophy last year, which is the Division II Heisman Trophy. So he can really throw. It'll be interesting to see where he goes in terms of postseason All-Star game circuit.
He won the Harlan Hill and stayed at Central Missouri. That is interesting because you would think, right, D2 Player of the Year quarterback, that he would have had a lot of interest from FCS and FBS schools. We mentioned earlier how you always take the time to go up to Canada and see some of their top prospects like Jeremiah Ojo, an edge rusher, and Isaiah Knight, a running back from British Columbia.
Isaiah Knight has that tall speed. He runs high, but is under control. He has great footwork, can bounce around different gaps to pick the right lane, has good acceleration, and he's able to break a lot of tackles too. He is someone that I can see playing down south, not only in the NFL, but also in one of these postseason All-Star games. And Ojo has tremendous twitch coming off the edge. So we know the Canadian prospects either be great offensive linemen, great pass rushers. We've seen that before. I'll see one later this afternoon at Giants camp when they joint practice with the Detroit Lions, and Matthew Betts, who played at Laval, went down to the Shrine game and has been balling. He led the CFL in sacks last year. So Ojo out of Montreal, University of Montreal, is a fantastic edge prospect.
You mentioned that you've been going to Giants camp every day. Just curious, what's jumped out to you? I don't mean Giants players or personnel, but just from a scouting perspective, things that you see that make you think, I gotta keep an eye on that during the season.
That's why I go, Ross. I'm glad you brought that up. The biggest thing I see is what works at the NFL level in terms of body types and athleticism. Because if you don't have those two things, it's going to be an uphill battle. So what you're seeing from the corners, what you're seeing from the offensive line, defensive line, that really helps you as a scout when you go back and watch film. You're able to quickly diagnose and rank and file where guys are going to go and slot.
Make sure you check him out on social media like I do, at FBall Game Plan on Twitter, Football Game Plan on YouTube, and the best preseason guide out there, footballgameplan.com. FCS.com/2024 draft guide. We'll have an epic new Even Money podcast tomorrow with Steve Fezzik. I am at Ross Tucker NFL. We are at Ross Tucker Pod. The keg is kicked. We are all tapped out.
Thanks for tuning in to College Draft. Make sure to also check out the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Even Money, and Fantasy Feast, all on the DraftKings Network, YouTube, or subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform.